My name is Steve Scheier. It is my pleasure to welcome you to a special edition of Firestarters. As you know, in our normal Firestarters format, we interview the really interesting, and creative, and powerful people in cannabis. And today, I'm pleased to say we have four of these people on the show today. And these are four women entrepreneurs, four women cannabis leaders. And we're going to talk about the challenges of being a woman in cannabis and how we can encourage more women to get in the space. It is my great pleasure to have on the show here today Myrna Gillis, Autumn Shelton, Lisa Hurwitz, and Ashlee Foy. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves to you. This is going to be a longer show. I think it's an important show. And thank you very much for listening. So without further ado, why don't the four of you, if you'd be so kind, introduce yourselves to the listeners. And thank you very much for being on the show.
So my name is Myrna Gillis, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Aqualitas. We are a Atlantic Canadian-based producer and processor out of Nova Scotia. My background was as a disabilities lawyer in the vulnerable services sector before getting into the space. A little bit about Aqualitas. In addition to being a multi-license holder, we have about 80 SKUs in stores right now. We have distribution across Canada, selling in the rec under our Reef Organic brand and Current brand, and medical in Aqualitas. On medical, we have full distribution across Canada, and we've exported actually to the United States and to Israel and to Europe. And one unique thing about how we grow using our own technology for aquaponics, which is the use of fish to generate nutrients for our flower system. We were also home of Canada's Grower of the Year in 2020 and Sustainable Energy Award in 2021.
Ashlee, would you like to go next?
My name is Ashlee Foy. I am the president of Arise Bioscience. We are a division of TerraSen, which is a larger cannabis company in the United States and based in Canada. We are the CBD hemp division of TerraSen. We are a wellness brand that believes in active cannabinoids, but we also believe in other ingredients like mushrooms and other supplements. And we're basically direct to consumer and brick and mortar. We are focusing on direct to consumer since the pandemic, so really focusing on the wellness channel of pain and inflammation in people over 40 that want to stay active lifestyle. We create a system that's pretty unique to the market that basically is a 4P system that we've included other FDA-approved ingredients into it, plus mushrooms and all cannabinoids. And it's amazing. We've got 2 professional athletes that use it that love it. So we are looking forward to our beginning launch of this product.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hurwitz. I'm the president and co-founder of Happi, which is Michigan's first infused beverage. It is a microdose beverage, currently 2.5 milligrams of THC on the market in the state of Michigan. We are soon to launch and recently just did a deal in the state of Maine. So we will have Happi on the market in Maine come July. And beyond just sort of the social aspect of replacing alcohol with cannabis, Happi strives to also look at the health and wellness side. So we will be launching several functional beverages late in the summer to address a myriad of kind of health and wellness needs with women in mind. And prior to founding Happi, I was the chief marketing officer of Grassroots Cannabis, which was a multi-state operator that was purchased by Curaleaf in the summer of 2020. So I've spent about 4 years in the cannabis industry, both on the brand side and the multi-state operator side. And prior to that, I had about a 20-year career in marketing in the consumer packaged goods world.
Autumn, last but not least, Autumn is also the person who did my first Firestarter show. And I'm so grateful that, Autumn, you're coming back again. So Autumn, please tell us about your work.
Good to be back. I'm Autumn Shelton. I'm the CFO and co-owner of Autumn Brands. We are a California-based licensed cultivator and brand that focuses on sustainability. We're women-owned, family-owned and run, and really dedicated to being 100% pesticide-free which we know is very rare. So we're hoping that is going to be the future for all cannabis growers as well. Our products we focus on, we have flower and pre-rolls, and we have our health and wellness line of a nourishing muscle and joint salve, and also our elixirs.
Wonderful. All right. Well, it's wonderful to see you all again, and thank you all for being. You are all on our Firestarters show, and I'm really grateful that you've been willing to come back. So let's talk about female leadership in cannabis, and in particularly, why is female leadership? Because I think it really is. Why is female leadership important in cannabis in this space? Anybody want to get started?
I'm happy to, Steve. Having kind of worked across 12 states in particular when I was at Grassroots, and now being focused on sort of the Michigan and Maine markets, I think one of the most important reasons is the consumer is heavily female, and that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. So currently, it's obviously a more male-dominated category, but women are coming in at hugely high rates into the category. And I think it's always really important for business owners to reflect their consumer target, right? So understanding a wide range of needs. And I'm seeing exciting growth in key categories that are particular to women where cannabis can really help, including things like menopause, right? Which is a huge growth category outside of cannabis, but there's a lot of companies coming online now that are, focused on really kind of women's health and wellness needs across the board. And I think it's important that brands and companies have women, in leadership positions who understand their consumer audience. So I think that's a really, in my mind, key reason why women's leadership, in reflecting their audience is important.
Very much so. And it's also, as you said, a growth area.
I would agree with Lisa. That's, one of the pieces to, I think, the puzzle of cannabis and hemp is connecting with the consumer. And if the consumer is majority 40 plus women, and you've got a male dominant industry trying to connect with them, I think it's very, very difficult. And when you don't listen to the female voice of why they're using cannabis, to be able to bring products to the market that connect with them emotionally, physically, everything, it's very, very disjointed, for sure.
Yeah.
I think another part of it too, that the leadership is important also because of the transition from the legacy market to the regulated market, and that there were a lot of women who were either participating and really risking their liberty, either as caregivers or individuals that were providing more so on the wellness side than obviously the recreational side. So I think that it's important to have that reflected in the industry, in the leadership into the regulated market as well, so that we are sort of having the benefit of that experience when it comes forward. And sort of adding to Ashlee and Lisa's point is also not just about the demographic of women as consumers, but also women as caregivers. And so, you're talking about purchasing decisions for, pediatric care, elder care, as well as, within the home. And so even if the consumption buying power isn't there, there is the buying power in relation to the spend of household income on what wellness products. And I think that that authenticity that you have when you have the leadership having a reflection of the consumer or the buyer is a critical point.
I echo what everyone else has already said. Women are so important in any industry for that matter, but cannabis specifically, because this is a plant that is used both medicinally and recreationally, and women really help bring and collaborate people together. We have a sense of empathy that men don't always have. So really being able to come up with new product innovations that really call to the women consumers. And the women are the caregivers of the families. So they're really looking for these health and wellness products. And this truly is a plant that, is part of us and helps balance us. And so it's really important to have that vision of women in this industry to help guide us. We're in our infancy right now. This is just the beginning, and we're setting the foundation for what's to come in the future. So women are certainly key to this, and we had a lot more of a higher percentage, back in 2019, I think, that were involved in ratio to men, but that doesn't mean there's less women now because that percentage has gone down. It's just that there's a lot more corporate men getting involved in this industry. And so it's really important for women to really get involved and be part of this so that we can continue to make sure that this the stigma disappears and this industry stays strong into the future.
Right.
Just to bounce off of what Autumn was saying is like scientifically, women do use more of their brain than men. And part of that piece is focus and impulse. So it brings together kind of that corporate feel of instead of doing impulse and running with it, it's kind of thinking through something, thinking through the steps and really focusing on those steps versus kind of that impulsive, just throw it out there and see what sticks kind of concept. And I think some companies, you'll see that impulsive, just throw it out there. Maybe the label's not correct. Maybe the product's not right yet, but they'll just throw it on the market to see if it goes. And I think women kind of reel that in and say, okay, let's look at this and let's really approach it the right way.
Now, as everyone knows, when cannabis started, it was very much a male-focused, male-dominated, perhaps because it was a legacy market. And now it's transitioning because there are innovators such as yourself that are coming online and saying, I really want to appeal to a particular market segment. Do you still feel like there's resistance to women leaders in the space? And if so, how does that resistance show itself?
I'll speak on this one, I guess, first is I've had a personal experience just with the company that I'm currently at. And the previous president was male. He was part owner in the brand Arise. TerrAscend purchased us. TerrAscend is a majority male dominant company. And me coming in and kind of voicing my opinions of the way of the direction of the company and how we should kind of target our particular audience and really fine tune it. Being told to basically don't speak unless I'm spoken to in a meeting is not okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
I think those are the pieces.
Definitely not okay.
I think those are the pieces where you feel like you're back in like 1920. And I think women need to stand up to that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
and have a voice.
I would agree with Ashlee very fully here. I think there's sort of almost I've seen sort of a divide. I think there's a lot of support kind of gaining for women entrepreneurs in the space, starting brands, supporting smaller brands, women supporting other women, which I love to see. And that's really exciting. But I think with the bigger, more corporate companies, it is so male dominated. And I would have hoped, because I started with grassroots 4 years ago in 2018, and I know TerrAscend's another one of the bigger kind of MSOs. They're just, the C-suites are really full of men, and that dynamic isn't shifting, unfortunately. In fact, last week I found out that 2 C-suite women at 2 of the MSOs are both gone now, which is really unfortunate. And I think, I heard someone say it best, which is until they have to uplist in the US, there will not be women in the C-suite or women on the board to the degrees we need to see in these big companies, because there's no real impetus other than, we're trying to do the right thing, or we want to have diversity. Most of these companies, have had a lot of men around for a long time and they're not going anywhere. So I am encouraged by what I'm seeing in the more entrepreneurial and brand and smaller space. I think there is support there, but it's coming in some cases, it's coming from men, but it's also coming from other women. The bigger companies, as they become more corporate, unfortunately, they're just not changing their behaviors in terms of hiring more women into senior positions, and that's unfortunate.
If they do hire female, usually it's a personal friend that they know that still doesn't have that voice. Because if you're hired because of your pedigree and your background, you're going to want to have a voice. If you're hired just because you know somebody and it's like, let's just put her on the board, let's, put her at this position, it's a little bit different because you kind of already coming in knowing like, I'll just be here to be here versus truly having a voice at the table.
I have felt nothing but support as a woman in this industry. In my experience so far, my partners, I became president of our association of all the major brands in California. And it's only been a really positive experience. And I've really kind of sought out other companies that were really women focused as well, where they were in the C-suite position. And so surrounding ourselves around that and uplifting each other has been pretty incredible. So I think there's a lot of challenges, but I think there's still a lot of positivity out there and a lot of support for women in executive roles and continuing to grow.
Okay, and we'll get to a little bit later about what steps any of us can take to encourage female leadership, but then thank you for that very much. Did I cut off somebody else? Myrna, did you want to say something?
The only thing I was going to add, I've been in the industry since 2014, and so a lot has happened in 8 years. I mean, that is a lifetime of the industry here in Canada, effectively. And what I would say is, I didn't really see a lot of legacy, Steve, in the Canadian market initially. I think that what I saw was a lot of folks that were in the corporate side and on the C-suite side coming from either high-risk industries like mining or from the finance industry without actually much of a connection at all to the cannabis space. And so I think that some of the early failure in the industry here had to do with the fact that there wasn't that sort of transition of experience because access the way that our regulator had made it quite prohibitive for anyone in the legacy market to participate. And as time evolved, obviously things like quality and some of that experience did get brought over. And I would say that you have the same reflection of the barriers to entry for women in general in the corporate industry as you do specific to cannabis. And so I would say that was certainly an early disadvantage in that accessing the capital in these publicly traded companies. There was it was quite fat, and there was a lot of overspend, and now we're sort of living with the consequences of that. And our industry in Canada is really in distress in a way because of a lot of that largesse, that men brought to the table. And if you look to the companies that are actually now continuing not only to hold market but to grow market share, the ones that were lean and really had to make do with a lot less, not because they wanted to have less, it's just that we had access to less, and so we needed to spend a lot more smartly. And so when you're looking at the C-suites, you're looking at the G&A and the spending expenses and all of those things. What I think is what was initially a disadvantage, which was access to capital, has turned out to be an advantage for the women leadership across the country because they really have been a lot more thoughtful about how they spent money and always saved a little bit for that rainy day. That wasn't in the mentality on the corporate side for some of those folks. So that was a disadvantage. And then I think that the one other thing that I would say I've certainly seen an evolution, but I mean, in early days, if you went to a trade show, I mean, there were the booth babes and there were a lot of objectifying women to sell products. And that was certainly a carryover from, anything from, the calendar mentality to anything else. And when I had to walk those floors, I found that, personally very offensive. And I also had great empathy for the people that, were put in those positions to have to, sell product literally with their bodies. And that's not, because they wanted to appeal to a particular demographic of the audience. And it was a presumption that demographic, that's what they wanted. And I think that with women in the industry over the last 8 years, you've seen that, the professionalization of the industry and also addressing the stigma and getting rid of a lot of those, those attitudes. And I'm not saying that they're all gone, but I've certainly seen an evolution. So I think that there was both the objectification and then the access, and those are things that I think we are slowly, evolving because of that.
I think that expression "booth babes" is horrifying.
It is horrifying, but it's exactly that's what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Let's not do that. Let's not go there anymore. So it's kind of an interesting question. Is it possible to, and I know some of you have had experience there, is it possible to reform companies, large companies, and encourage them to put more women into senior positions? Or should we be creating an environment where there's more entrepreneurial ability for women to seize the day? So in essence, what's your thinking about that? Is it, and of course, it's not a binary choice. Both things will happen. But if you had to bet on changing the structure and the dynamic of a large company, or creating the impetus for women to create their own individual companies? Where would you put the emphasis?
I think like Lisa said, that there's going to be so much of a battle to break down what's already built in these large companies, that the really true way for a woman to build in this industry is entrepreneurship, is to take the lead and create their own table and have that diversity available to them.
In the same camp as Ashlee, I think there's too much structure already in place. There's also too much money, and I know your favorite word is power. There's too much money and too much power in these big companies, right, Steve, in my opinion, to change those dynamics. Now, that being said, I think, look, leadership can change. I think there's more open-mindedness sometimes when fresh people come in. I think, again, more women in the C-suite, more women on the board, like that will happen over time, whatever the catalyst is. But I agree with Ashlee. I think we need to fund women entrepreneurs, right? And I know one of your questions is going to be, how do we support more women coming forward later on? But I think part of it is women, Myrna mentioned this too, women have traditionally had far less access to capital than men have, period, right? I mean, not only in cannabis, but in, the business world at large. In cannabis in particular, that has been very, very true for many years. And the more capital that can come in to the category to support women entrepreneurs, I think that's a fantastic thing, to get to see more women leaders in bigger roles, have more influence in the industry, in the category. But in order to do that, they need capital. And right now, capital is very hard to find in the whole category, let alone capital for women. So I think I would bet on women entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely be more focused on creating opportunities for women to be able to get involved and create their own business and create something that comes from their heart, rather than trying to work with someone else's concept that isn't women focused, that's very male focused. And I mean, this is, historically, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, trying to change the culture of a male dominated corporation is very challenging. And I think we've made leaps and bounds, over the last 20, 30 years, but it's still a struggle. And so, I've talked to a number of different women who are in those kind of positions and feel like they can never rise their way up. And so I think cannabis, because it's this incredible new opportunity and new industry, there's so much opportunity for women to create something new and be that entrepreneurial and really thrive.
I was going to say, I agree that entrepreneurship is probably the most practical way, because at least you have some opportunity to influence what's happening in your environment if you do it from, bootstrapped from the ground up. But on the flip side of that, it's not, I think that we should concurrently aspire to both, because to me, there are opportunities, certainly, again, in the Canadian space, where there were a lot of publicly traded companies, and certainly, the listing of these corporations, there are guidance about composition of boards. We know also, if you're not motivated by the greed, that diverse boards are more successful than those that are not. You certainly, if that's what motivates you, but it's the right thing to do. I mean, socially, it's the more responsible approach to take. And so I don't want to sort of give a pass to the responsibilities of corporations to be more diverse, not just with women, but across the entire, across the board, because it is important to reflect the population as a whole. And I'd like to say that we're making progress, but in fact, we're losing ground. And I think we're in a time, particularly between the US and Canada, where we're seeing a lot of, a lot of backslide when it comes to issues of diversity and access and discrimination. And so I think that we have to always be vigilant and never sort of let our eye off the ball, so to speak, and to always be an activist, because no one is going to champion our voices other than ourselves, and so it's really important that we keep that focus on both sides.
So
Well said.
as Lisa said earlier, and thank you, Lisa, for saying it. I am always interested in power. As I mentioned earlier, I just came back from giving the commencement address at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, and my address is all about power and how to use it for good and how to use it. My messages were: power wants a vessel. It's an element out there in the world. It's either going to seek you or someone else. Let it be you, particularly if you want to use it for good. So my question for the four of you is, how and when have you used your power to achieve the goals that you want to achieve? Because at the end of the day, there are many people, we're focused on women, so let's just talk about women. There are women that want to get in this business, want to be successful in this business, and don't know how and are afraid. People are very afraid of power sometimes, and it's sort of my job to help them break through that to a certain extent. What wisdom and advice would you have to women who are listening about how they can be powerful in this space and achieve what they want to achieve?
I would say, first and foremost is pick wisely. Companies, I've always thought this, companies start from the top. The culture starts from the top. Mm-hmm. So no matter if you're working for, let's just say, a division of a company, if you're working for the company itself, the culture of that company starts from the very top. And it doesn't matter how many people are between you and that person, it's still the culture of the company. And I would say looking at this industry is pick wisely, is do your due diligence to learn about who's on the board and the diversity of the board and who's the leadership team, diversity of the leadership team, and really kind of just get a feel for the industry, because you can do a lot of research and kind of get a feel for a company's culture and what is fake and what is real. And right. I think for sure to do that is very, very
I think that's an excellent advice. And people are sometimes so desperate to get into the industry that they don't pay attention to those cues. And I think you're exactly right, Ashlee. I think that those cues are out there. And one of the ways I closed my speech, I won't be talking about my speech all the entire session, but one of the things I said was, don't work for people who want to take your power or who do not want to give you power, right? Or are not open to you advocating for power. And I think you can pretty easily tell, just following up on your point, Ashlee, that there are environments that are really want to centralize their power and are not willing to give that. So that was a very good first point. Are there others that other folks would like to make?
I think we used to say action and words, both. And so I think for us, 2/3 of our directors are women, 46% of our employees are women, 10% BIPOC, 8% LGBTQ. And so we, to Ashlee's point, you demonstrate that in your workplace. And what happens is that when you create an inclusive environment, you get exceptional candidates that value inclusion above other things. And so when money is tight, but you have a shared value, people will work together and they will have your back and they will support you and go that extra mile, because values are what keep people going and when things are tough. And then the other part is that don't just keep that message in-house. You need to share that message, because people need to see that you can do this and be successful. And so, like for us, the other thing that we did, we ran our True Colors campaign, which we picked a single product. We call it True Colors, and we collaborate with. So for this one, their first campaign, we're doing Pride. A percentage goes to communities that are Pride. Queer communities. And then the next is going to be the Cannabis Amnesty. We're going to run that during Black History Month. And then the next is the Planet, an environmental campaign that follows that True Colors, so that you're always messaging externally as well as internally those values. And that's, I think, a really good way for people to see that you can do it, you can be successful. And there are companies out there that reflect the demographic of the world around them, that can care about people, care about the planet, and can do well. And so I think that you need to do actions and internal and external facing.
Yes. You have to use your voice. And
exactly.
It's really Really important. Yes, I completely agree.
Steve, I also have one other one, which is power doesn't also mean going it alone. I think there's tremendous power in numbers. And I think for right now in the cannabis
Absolutely.
industry for women, one of the biggest lessons I learned when I got out of the MSO space in late 2020, I felt very alone in the C-suite. I felt very kind of alone in the, being a woman in cannabis, period. And I reached out like blindly on LinkedIn to another woman who posted something about women in cannabis. And it spiraled into this group that I created of executive women in cannabis called Wink. And I think you and I have talked about this before, but one of the best things about this group is that it has created a sense of like, camaraderie and teamwork, but also vulnerability. And I think women who are all used to being on all the time because they have to be in boardrooms or they have to be in the C-suite can be like, you know what? I'm having a really hard time right now, and we had a call Friday, which was all about looking at the state of the industry, which is not great right now, and saying, what can we do to help each other? What do you need was the question. And I think power is about vulnerability sometimes, and it's not doing it alone, it's doing it in numbers. And I guess what I would say is for women out there, whether you're in a corporate role and feel like sometimes you're alone in that boardroom, or whether you're, a female entrepreneur and you need help getting funded, raising money, you need help, with expansion, whatever it may be. I think it's really important to ask for help. And I think women helping women is probably, in my mind, one of the best things we can do in the industry right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say you definitely want to define your short-term and your long-term goals. And continue to communicate through the way. So if you do your research on the company that you're looking to work for, through the interview process, ask those questions to make sure that those goals that you're looking for. Same with if you're just going to start your own business or find a new partnership with somebody, continue to do your research and understand, what you need to accomplish those long-term goals and even those short-term goals. And then once you are within that company, then really continue to collaborate, work with others, find other like-minded women or men throughout that company that allows you to really build that culture of that company that you want to work for and that you want to be a part of for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. So I guess our last question that I have before we get into our wrap-up and thanks is, what else would you like to see have happen to support women in the field? If there are aspects of leadership development or training, or really the big issue is finance. Money is really the most important thing. I did a great show last week, and this is another great show with Michael Webster, who is in Michigan, and we talked about the pluses and minuses of social equity programs. And there are quite a lot more minuses than there are positives in social equity right now. It's people who have wanted to do something good in the space, but they've struggled. And so what can we do as individuals to encourage more female leadership in the space? Money is certainly part of it. Support is certainly part of it. Is there anything interesting and creative that you can think of that would be of value to women who want to be in this world?
Well, I think the space is not a large space, but yet we've got a lot of people just jumping into it. And what I'd like to see is, these women entrepreneurs joining forces together. And instead of large MSOs buying these little companies and putting them just under their umbrella, is strategically thinking through power in numbers, like Lisa said. So if one company is, skincare based and another company is, drink based, and just combining the forces and saying, instead of us letting somebody buy us, let's join forces together and build something like really, really great and take over a huge space. Because I think that's the only way you're really going to conquer the large companies. I mean, they're throwing millions and millions and millions at it. So I think it's important for the female entrepreneurs is to join forces, but I also think it's important to find men that support the women, that they can have that same voice, but target a completely different audience of either entrepreneurs or companies to join as well.
Yeah, I love what Ashlee just said. And I think, even from sitting in my seat as the president of Happi and looking at a beverage, we've gotten approached, portfolios of beverage companies, but we've also gotten approached by brands that are all female targeted to say, okay, let's, join forces and go in together. I think the other thing is a lot of the, back to the word power and money in the space, is still sits with the licenses. I mean, and I'm talking about more the US market, but it sits with the licenses. And I think as we see more in the Northeast in particular, I would like to see more regulations, but also B, just kind of more support for, some of these kind of regional operators being female led. They're just not enough. I mean, and I think as more licenses get awarded by state, there's been a heavy focus on social equity, which is really important. But I think we also need to look at female leadership as part of that, right? And whether it's coming from a regulatory perspective or whether it's just coming from, some of the private capital that's coming into the market and saying, okay, I'm not going to fund another, licensed company unless you have a female, CEO, or unless you have this number of women on the board. I mean, to Ashlee's point, men have that power too. So let's use it to help promote diversity, in more ways than just sort of these social equity programs that the states are trying to put in place.
Yeah, and putting in place in very, very inefficient and contradictory and very awkward ways. I mean, a tiny little plug for my show with Michael. The whole issue is when we talk about social equity, by definition, we are downplaying. We're saying you aren't good enough in the way to do this on your own. We must help you. There's a certain belief that social equity is like a crutch, and the people who are involved in social equity programs want the ability to compete, but they simply don't have the resources to do it. I think the same thing is true with women companies, with women-owned companies. They have completely the ability to compete, but they need the resources. And if you never have the resources, you're always on the verge of strangulation.
Well, and it's funny you say that, Steve, just because I had a conversation with someone in PR about these lists, like the top 10 women, what you just said about social equity, top 10 women in cannabis. It's like, well, why couldn't that person just be one of the top people in cannabis? Why do they have to be one of the top 10 women? And so it's this constantly like reinforcing of, it's not, you're not able to be one of the top 10 leaders in cannabis. You have to be qualified as one of the top women leaders in cannabis, right? And that's the same thing with the social equity programs. Why can't they compete just period? Why do they have to be given the social equity, grant, right? So I think that kind of reinforcing behavior around minorities and women is really just dangerous for the category and just in general.
It is dangerous, but I also think that in some respects it's necessary, because if you look at if I sit on another women's panel at a conference, you go and you're like, why are you not just sort of the experts? I 100% agree with that, but I also know from a social equity perspective that we're, especially for minority women, especially for certain, like without the program, there may not be opportunity for certain individuals. And so I think that what you have is you have a basket, and you select, based on what your need is. And so I know, like when I went to law school, before there was, and that was in the late 80s. I mean, there were no Black, Indigenous graduates coming from the program until there was a scholarship program, until there was a support program and network. And now, there's a very rich, number of graduates. But had that not happened, we would have still been stifling the barriers to access that continue to exist. And so I'm a true believer in removing barriers, and that people's inability to participate in certain levels of the market is not as a result of their lack of resourcefulness, individually, that sometimes there are just huge barriers that we need to sort of address. And so I like the idea of having some access to that, but I also think it's important that, we also make sure that as leaders, that we are comfortable, that we are, successful because we're successful. We're not successful because of any inherent quality, related to our gender. Probably, right. So I think that those are things. The only other thing that I do, in addition to the access to capital, the vertical integration of women in this network, we really do not partner as strongly as I think we could. I think that there are real opportunities, and right from the supply chain up to retail, for the products that we have, that we can collaborate, because that is, I know that almost every person, actually everyone, has talked about the importance of collaboration, and that is where the true power lies. Because I think that collectively, if we are more mindful of what all of our colleagues are doing, that are women or that are in diversity categories, then I think there's an opportunity for some economies of scale that we do not have alone. And so I love the idea of, companies coming together and merging that way. I love the idea of having scale. And that's kind of a little bit of what we did, because we weren't one of the behemoths, right? And if we didn't collaborate with others, we couldn't get a lot of the stuff done that we got done.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, it kind of brought something up too, is really encouraging, I think, the marketing industry, Google, all of them, is to open up the space to where it's more flexible, because I think we're targeting the same consumers versus really opening up the knowledge and the information, the education to consumers that don't know about cannabis or hemp and don't really know what it can do for your body. And I think the regulations on how we actually are able to market these products, I think, is important, because I think because I don't come from this industry, and I think a lot of women in the corporate world, I think, are scared because it's such a challenge to grow a brand when you've got basically hogtied in every little channel you go, and you've got to maneuver and figure out, okay, well, I can't say CBD and I can't say hemp and I can't say cannabis. I think the more that we encourage that to open up, I think is going to help with entrepreneurs, women, I think women from corporate worlds coming into maybe big MSOs that have a wealth of knowledge differently, because I come from the wellness and health space, but it'll feel more comfortable, because when you come into it at first, you're like, well, I can't do this and I can't do this, and we can't bank with this bank, and we have to maneuver this way. So I think it's important that we encourage that to kind of open up.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet. Obviously, women are still a small percentage of this industry in the C-suite level, and we really need to keep bringing that message forward, how important it is for women to be in this. And it should be talked about top 10, and then also a woman. And also these women are part of that. In California, our market crashed last summer, a year ago. And there's a lot of noise right now with a lot of random brands that are just trying to come in and make a quick buck. But, really being able to push that messaging forward for any of these women-owned companies that have been in this for a long time. It's so important to get past all that noise and all these other just one-off type of brands and collaborate with each other, collaborate with a flower brand and accessory brand, really come together and utilize our resources so that we can really make this, just an incredible woman-focused industry.
Okay, and on that note, I want to thank all of you very much for participating in the show today. I know that people will learn quite a bit from your experience, and I'm really honored that you took the time to be on the show. And you're here for a reason. You're here because I interviewed many, many people, and the four of you are really leaders and pioneers and strategists and great leaders in the field, and I wanted people to see you. And so I'm very, very grateful that you've been on the show, and thank you very, very much for participating.